Welcome to EchoShade, where history whispers its darkest secrets and forgotten stories.
Princess Alice's life began not with the applause of a royal court, but with a quietness so deep it shaped her destiny. Born in Windsor Castle in 1885, she entered the world into one of Europe's most interconnected royal families. Her mother, Princess Victoria of Hesse, instantly adored her. Her father, Prince Louis of Battenberg, held her as if the entire future of their legacy slept in her tiny hands. But within months, something felt unusual. Alice did not react to loud noises, nor did she startle like other infants. Music, laughter, footsteps, none drew her attention. Only when she saw her mother's face did she brighten with recognition. Doctors examined her and confirmed what her mother already feared. Alice was deaf. For most royal households of that era, this would be a secret to bury, a shame to hide. But Princess Victoria refused to accept that fate for her daughter. She became Alice's fiercest protector, turning her life into a mission of understanding, patience, and love. She taught Alice to lip read before the child could walk steadily. She trained her to recognize emotion in facial expression, tone in movement, warmth in eyes. Alice grew up silent, yes, but never disconnected. In the soft, golden-lit rooms of her childhood, she learned that communication had more forms than sound. By age 8, she could lip read in English, German, and French. Her tutors were amazed. Her mother was proud. And Alice herself, though she never said it, felt a quiet triumph. Her deafness would have broken a weaker spirit. But Alice's silence became a unique kind of strength, sharpening her ability to observe what others missed. She saw people's fears before they spoke them. She sensed loneliness in their posture, anger in their hands, tenderness in their eyes. She understood human nature with a depth that made her extraordinary. Despite her silent world, she found joy in movement. She loved riding, dancing, and walking through palace gardens. She memorized people's voices by the rhythm of their lips, the softness or hardness of their expression. In the stillness of her world, she discovered a focus that many envied. But palace life was not kind to difference. As Alice grew older, guests whispered about her deafness. Ladies in gowns exchanged looks of pity. Some suggested she would never marry, never lead, never bear children capable of holding royal titles. Alice knew, even as a teenager, that she was being measured by standards she never agreed to. But she never allowed bitterness to consume her. She turned instead to compassion, to faith, to a moral strength far beyond her years. Her life took a romantic turn at age 17, when she met Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark, a handsome, confident officer of the Greek Royal Navy. He was athletic, charming, and instantly enchanted by Alice's grace. She had a serenity that drew him in, a quiet courage he could not ignore. Their marriage in 1903 was a glittering European event attended by kings and queens. Alice, radiant in satin and lace, felt more hopeful than she ever had. She believed her life was about to be filled with happiness, family, and purpose. And for a while it was. She gave birth to 4 daughters. Margarita, Theodora, Cecily, and Sophie, each child adored her. She told them stories through expressive gestures, teaching them to read her face the way she read the world. Prince Andrew respected her deeply, though he never fully understood the heavy silence she lived in. But destiny had different plans. Political unrest exploded across Greece, forcing Alice and her young family into danger. Their home became unsafe. Soldiers patrolled the streets. Whispers of assassination and exile spread like wildfire. Alice, pregnant once again, with the child who would become Prince Philip, escaped with her family under the cover of night. She held her daughters close as they fled by boat, her heart pounding with fear and fierce determination. She never let the children see her panic. In those moments, she was not a princess. Not a royal, not a figure of status. She was simply a mother fighting to protect her children. When they finally reached safety, she gave birth to Prince Philip on the kitchen table of a villa in Corfu. No silk, no palace, no ceremony. Just a mother bringing life into the world while her kingdom crumbled around her. Little did she know that this fragile baby boy born amid exile would one day follow her strength, her resilience, and her sense of duty, and marry a future queen. But Alice's challenges were far from over. The pressures of exile, political fear, and constant displacement began to fracture her mental peace. She heard once that suffering can deepen faith, but she never expected faith itself to become both her refuge and her battlefield. Her mind began drifting into realms of visions and divine callings. She felt she was chosen for holy missions, destined to hear God's voice even though she could not hear the world's. At first, her family dismissed her intense spirituality as stress, but gradually, her beliefs became obsessive, pulling her away from reality. She prayed for hours, isolated herself, and spoke of angels standing in the corners of rooms. She fasted, refused meals, and believed she possessed healing powers. Doctors were called, therapies were attempted, explanations were offered, but no one truly listened to her. Her husband thought she was losing touch with sanity. Her mother believed she needed medical help. Alice herself felt she was undergoing a transformation, something sacred, painful, and incomprehensible. Finally, when she was in her early 40s, her family made a decision that would break her heart and change the course of her life forever. They had her diagnosed with schizophrenia, a label given hastily by doctors who barely understood her condition. Alice was forcibly taken to a Swiss asylum. The woman who had survived exile, childbirth during chaos, and the burdens of royalty now faced locked rooms, unfamiliar doctors, and the loneliness of misunderstanding. Her children were told she needed rest. She was told she was ill. But inside, she believed she was being punished for something she could not name. Philip, only 9 years old at the time, watched his mother being taken away. He asked where she was going. He asked why she wasn't hugging him goodbye. No one answered him. And that silence, the worst Alice ever knew, became the wound she carried inside her for years. Her life had shattered. Her family was scattered. Her identity was slipping away. But Princess Alice of Battenberg was no ordinary royal. She was not done fighting, not done loving, not done surviving. Her greatest transformation was yet to come. The room was narrow, the windows shuttered, and the air smelled faintly of disinfectant, cold, sterile, and unwelcoming. For Princess Alice, the Swiss asylum was not a place of healing. It was a prison disguised as mercy. She arrived there with a quiet dignity that masked the raging storm inside her. Doctors observed her as though she were a rare specimen, whispering notes while she sat silently, refusing to break down in front of them. She had survived exile, childbirth during chaos, and political collapse. But this confinement, this stripping of her identity, this sense of being misunderstood by the people she loved most, pierced her more sharply than any past suffering. Inside her, two worlds collided, tilted, one filled with unshakable faith, visions, prayers, angels she believed guided her, the other filled with a sudden, suffocating loneliness as she realized her family had chosen separation over understanding. Her husband, Prince Andrew, visited only sporadically. Each visit felt colder than the last. His once warm, confident demeanor had hardened into detachment. He had lost his homeland, his status, his purpose, and rather than leaning into his family, he drifted away like a man grieving a life he no longer recognized. Alice watched him closely. She saw the guilt in his eyes each time he looked at her. He saw her fragility as a burden. She saw his distance as abandonment. Their conversations grew shorter. Their pauses grew longer. Eventually, his visits stopped altogether. Her daughters were kept far away, told that their mother needed a rest and treatment. And young Philip, her bright, spirited boy, was taken in by relatives, shuffled between aristocratic homes, learning early that the world offered little stability. Alice spent her days trying to make sense of a reality that seemed both distant and painfully vivid. She prayed with intensity, believing she was undergoing a spiritual trial. She fasted, convinced purification would bring clarity. She cried sometimes, silently, her tears rolling down her face without a single sound escaping her lips. She could not hear her own sobs. She could not hear the footsteps of nurses as they passed her door. She could not hear the click of keys or the murmur of voices down the hall. Her world had always been silent, but this silence felt different. It was oppressive. It was controlled. It was chosen for her. The doctors wrote notes about religious delusions, hallucinations, and a psychosis. Alice read their lips, recognizing every word they whispered about her. They didn't understand her faith. They didn't understand her pain. They saw her devotion as illness, her visions as madness. She longed to write to her son, to hold him, to let him know she had not abandoned him. But her letters were censored. Her messages filtered through guardians who deemed them unstable. At night, she lay awake in the narrow cot, replaying memories of Philip as a toddler. His tiny fingers curled around hers, his laughter filling rooms she could not hear, but could feel. She remembered his curious eyes, his stubborn determination, his bravery. She prayed he would not forget her. Months became years, and yet something profound began to shift within her. Her faith, once overwhelming, settled into something steadier. She still believed in God, still sought purpose, but the feverish intensity softened into calm reflection. She began reading again. Philosophy, scripture, and memoirs of saints who had endured suffering not as punishment, but as transformation. Alice realized she did not belong in confinement. She was not broken. She was misunderstood. Princess Victoria looked older. The weight of guilt etched into her features. She had believed she was helping her daughter by committing her to treatment. But now she saw that Alice's spirit had not been healed. It had been wounded. Alice watched her mother speak with a kind of calm resolve. She made it clear. She wanted to leave. She was ready to return to the world. She wanted independence, purpose, her identity. After long discussions, assessments, and debates between doctors and family, a decision was made. Princess Alice was released. Stepping outside the institution for the first time felt like stepping into life again. The sky looked wider, the air tasted sweeter. She felt lighter, though the pain of separation and misunderstanding still lingered deep inside. Yet freedom did not mean reunion. Prince Andrew was living a separate life in Monte Carlo, surrounded by luxury and distractions to fill the void of his lost career. Reconciliation was impossible. Their marriage had dissolved long before their hearts accepted it. Her daughters had grown into young women, married, moved away, each navigating her own royal responsibilities across Europe. They loved their mother, but distance had become their reality. And Philip, now a teenager, was forging his own path. Living with the Mountbattens, the Milford Havens, the marquises and duchesses who shaped his education, he was becoming independent, resilient, and disciplined. Alice loved him fiercely. But she also understood that she had missed years of his life, years she would never get back. Instead of dwelling on loss, she sought meaning. She found it in faith. But this time, faith was not an escape. It was a calling. Alice moved to Athens and joined the Greek Orthodox Church, adopting a simpler life. She wore plain clothes, lived with minimal comforts, and spent her days helping the poor, the sick, and the hungry. She visited hospitals, organized charities, and worked tirelessly with women who had nowhere else to go. She was no longer a princess in the traditional sense. She became something far more powerful, a symbol of compassion in a world drowning in political chaos. Europe inched closer to war. Alice saw the suffering around her intensify. Families fled their homes. Mothers cried for sons lost to conflict. Children searched for missing parents. Her empathy, sharpened by her own suffering, grew deeper than ever. When World War II erupted, Athens fell under Nazi occupation. Most royals fled. Alice stayed. She refused to abandon the people who needed her most. She walked the streets in her simple gray habit, comforting refugees, finding food for starving families, and offering solace where hope had vanished. Her deafness became both shield and burden. German officers questioned her. She pretended not to hear, forcing them to give up in frustration. She moved silently through the city like a shadow of mercy. One day, a desperate family came to her. The Cohens, Jews hunted by the Nazis. They begged for shelter, fearing imminent death. Alice did not hesitate. She hid them inside her home, fed them, protected them. When the Gestapo arrived, accusing her of hiding Jews, she replied calmly that she could not hear them. They shouted questions. She stared back blankly. They threatened her. She remained still. Her silence saved lives. Her courage defied an empire built on terror. But even as she risked everything, her heart ached for Philip. He was serving in the Royal Navy, fighting a war of his own across distant seas. She prayed for him every night, tracing his name with trembling fingers in her prayer book. By the war's end, Alice had become a hero in Athens. She had survived famine, occupation, and danger with extraordinary bravery. Yet her greatest moment of redemption came years later, in 1947, when she traveled to London for Philip's wedding, to Princess Elizabeth II. She walked into Westminster Abbey wearing a simple grey nun's habit. No jewels, no silks, no crown. She stood apart from the glittering guests, humble yet dignified. When Philip saw her, his face lit up with a mixture of love and relief. He embraced her tightly, holding her longer than royal protocol allowed. After years of separation, he finally had his mother back. Alice felt the weight of her life, its tragedies, exiles, visions, loneliness, triumphs, culminate in that single moment. Her son, now a man, was stepping into a role that would shape the world, and she had lived long enough to witness it. But destiny had more in store for her. Her legacy as a mother, a survivor, a rebel, a saintly figure was still unfolding, quietly, powerfully, and far beyond the expectations of any royal court. The applause inside Westminster Abbey had faded long ago, but for Alice, the memory lingered like a warm flame glowing in an unlit room. Watching her son marry the future Queen of England had stirred something deep within her. Something tender, something healing, something she thought life had stolen from her forever. Years of separation, suffering, misunderstanding, and wandering had led to that single moment. Philip turning to her as a man, not a frightened child begging for an explanation. He embraced her with a force that whispered the truth neither had ever put into words. "I needed you. I never forgot you." But after the wedding celebrations ended and the world resumed its relentless pace, Alice felt strangely adrift. The palace around her buzzed with courtly expectations, glittering traditions, polite conversations, and quiet judgments. It reminded her of everything she had once been, and everything she no longer wished to become. She returned to Athens not as a royal guest, but as a woman who had found her calling. War had ended, but its wounds ran deep through the city. Buildings lay in ruins. Families struggled to rebuild shattered lives. Children wandered streets orphaned or hungry. Alice re-entered this world of loss like a quiet angel, walking, helping, listening, offering comfort through gestures, touch, and unwavering presence. Her home became a refuge once again. Her days were spent visiting hospitals, arranging food distributions, and praying with women who had lost everything. In her simple gray habit, she looked more like a saint than a princess. Yet, she never saw herself that way. She saw herself as someone who had suffered enough to understand suffering in others. Her deafness, once considered a weakness, became her secret strength. She paid attention to the world through eyes, hands, and heart, perceiving emotions far more clearly than sounds. People trusted her. They told her their fears, their grief, their regrets, their desperate dreams. She guided them wordlessly, offering comfort in the way she touched a hand or smiled with her eyes. In a city torn apart by war, her presence became a beacon of peace. But in the shadows of Greece, a new storm was rising. A civil war broke out, vicious, unpredictable, fueled by foreign powers and old grudges. Streets once filled with merchants became battlegrounds. Secrets multiplied. Men disappeared in the night. Mothers waited outside prisons begging for news of sons. Alice refused to leave. Everyone warned her. She stayed. Everyone begged her to flee. She stayed. The palace in England offered her safe lodging. She stayed in her small room in Athens instead. She believed God wanted her there. And she believed Philip would understand. Sometimes she wrote him letters, long, heartfelt messages filled with prayers and motherly hope. Other times she simply held his photographs, tracing the outline of his face with thin, trembling fingers. She followed news of his naval missions. She celebrated his successes. She worried endlessly. But always, she focused on her mission. One winter afternoon, she found a young boy huddled in the ruins of a bombed building. His clothes were ripped, his face streaked with dust, and his eyes reflected a terror no child should know. He had lost his mother in an explosion 2 nights earlier. He had nowhere to go. Alice knelt beside him, gently wiping his tears. She wrapped her shawl around his shoulders and carried him home. That night, she prayed over him with a tenderness that pierced her own heart. As he slept, curled against her arm, she felt again the ache of Philip's childhood, the years she had missed, the mother she had failed to be, the memories she had lost. She vowed silently, "I will give to others what I could not give you." Her charity grew larger. Newspapers occasionally mentioned her work, but she avoided attention. She believed compassion should be given quietly, without the need for applause. Yet even as she poured herself into service, her health began to weaken. Long walks through harsh winters, sleepless nights, and little food took their toll. Her hands trembled more often now. Her breath felt shorter, but she ignored every ache and pain. The poor needed her. Lonely widows sought her wisdom. Orphans looked for her smile. She refused to rest. But Greece was changing again. Politics took dark turns. Defied royalist sentiments rose. The monarchy became a target, not just of criticism, but of violence. Alice's presence became dangerous. Once again, she was warned. Once again, she ignored the warnings. The danger found her anyway. One night, soldiers raided a neighborhood near her home, searching for political dissidents. A young mother, terrified and carrying an infant, ran to Alice's door begging for help. Without hesitation, Alice ushered her inside, hiding both in a storage room. Moments later, soldiers banged on her door. They demanded to search the house. They accused her of aiding enemies. Alice faced them calmly, her silence intentional and powerful. They shouted at her. She stared back. They threatened her. She remained unmoving. Eventually, frustrated by what they assumed was confusion or stubbornness, they left. Inside the storage room, the young mother wept into Alice's hands. Just as in the war, her deafness had saved lives. Silence had become her shield. But England watched the situation from afar with growing alarm. Princess Elizabeth and Philip both received reports about Alice's dangerous circumstances. They sent multiple requests asking her to return to London. She refused every time, until the day came when Greece's political situation turned catastrophic. Military coups erupted. The royal family fled. The streets were filled with protesters, soldiers, and gunfire. Alice was no longer just a helper to the poor. She was a royal in danger of being killed. Finally, by force of circumstance, she was escorted out of Athens and brought back to England. In 1967, she arrived at Buckingham Palace not as a guest, but as a resident. Her entrance was quiet. She carried only a small suitcase. Her clothes were simple. Her possessions few. Queen Elizabeth welcomed her with genuine warmth. Philip embraced her with a long, emotional hug. He placed his forehead gently against hers, whispering something only she could read from his lips. "You're safe now, Mama." For the first time in decades, she lived under the same roof as her son. Their bond grew deeper, tenderer and layered with unspoken understanding. Philip often visited her rooms late at night, seeking the comfort only a mother can offer. Sometimes they spoke of the past, painful memories, lost years, misunderstandings. Other times they simply sat in silence, enjoying each other's presence, knowing words were never needed between them. Alice spent her last years wandering the palace gardens, praying in the quiet corners of her room, and writing letters to people she once helped in Greece. She remained humble despite the luxury surrounding her. She had lived as a princess, a refugee, a patient in confinement, a nun, a humanitarian, and finally as the mother of the Queen's consort. Her life had been a journey of breaking and remaking, a story of faith forged through suffering. A heart that found purpose in pain. Her legacy, though unspoken, glowed brightly in every action she took, every life she touched, and her story was not yet over. Buckingham Palace had always been a world of precision, guards moving in perfect rhythm, corridors polished to gleaming gold, and every whisper wrapped in centuries of etiquette. And yet, in the quietest corner of this grand structure lived a woman who defied every rule the palace had ever known. Princess Alice of Battenberg kept only what she needed: a few religious icons, a worn prayer book, and simple clothing. Her room, compared to the opulent chambers around her, looked almost monastic. She preferred it that way. After a lifetime of turmoil, the palace's calm was the first place where she didn't feel judged, chased, or forced to outrun her past. But what moved her most was not the comfort. It was Philip. For the first time since he was a little boy, she saw him daily. He would knock gently before entering, as if afraid of disturbing the delicate peace she had built for herself. Sometimes he arrived cheerful after a royal event, sometimes weighed down by responsibility, sometimes carrying the weariness of a man whose life was always under scrutiny. But in front of Alice, he was simply her son. He often sat at the foot of her bed, leaning forward like a child listening to bedtime stories, except now it was she who listened, watching his lips carefully, absorbing his worries, and comforting him with her presence more than with words. Philip would talk about his duties, about the pressure of standing beside a queen, about the loneliness that accompanied leadership. Alice understood all of it. She had lived in palaces too. She had lived through the burden of titles, the suffocation of expectations. Sometimes she touched his hand and whispered with her eyes, "You are stronger than you believe," and Philip always smiled. But with each passing year, Alice's health began to decline. Her hands shook more often, her breath shortened, her step became slower. She hid these signs from Philip as best as she could. She did not want him to worry. She had not returned to England to burden him. She had returned to hold him close, quietly, simply, gratefully. In public, people rarely saw her. She avoided formal engagements, preferring to sit by her window overlooking the palace gardens. She watched birds land on branches, children playing on the lawns, the slow turning of seasons. These small, simple scenes meant more to her than all the royal splendor she had once known. But she did allow herself one moment of visibility. In 1969, she appeared in the famous royal family documentary. While most royals were portrayed in elegant routines or formal settings, Alice sat in her grey nun's habit, her hands folded peacefully. When asked why she chose this life, she simply said, visible only through her expression, "I am where I am meant to be." Behind those few words was a lifetime. Yet despite the calm around her, Alice carried a deep, silent grief, one that never fully healed. Her daughters, scattered across Europe, were swallowed by the tragedies of war, marriages, and political upheavals. She had lost one of them, Princess Cecily, in a heartbreaking plane crash, along with her entire family. It was a wound so raw that Alice rarely allowed herself to speak of it. She kept their photographs in a small wooden box, locked away with trembling hands. Some nights, she lit a candle beside them and prayed, tears slipping down her cheeks in utter silence. But Philip, her pride, her redemption, remained her anchor. He often entered her room late at night, after long days of ceremonies and meetings. He loosened his collar, sank into the chair beside her bed, and spoke softly. He told her things he told no one else: the exhaustion, the weight of public opinion, the fear of failure. Alice understood him with the depth of a mother who had suffered more than most and survived more than anyone expected. She told him through her eyes that he was enough, more than enough. This quiet companionship became the last blessing of her life. One autumn evening, the sky outside Buckingham Palace softened into shades of gold and lilac. Alice sat by her window, a shawl over her shoulders, watching the leaves fall one by one. She felt a heaviness in her chest, not painful, profound, like the final note of a long, haunting melody. She understood. She had lived long enough to see her son find his place in the world, long enough to reconcile with her past, long enough to transform her suffering into compassion. When Philip entered that night, she held his hand longer than usual. He asked if she was tired. She nodded slightly, but her eyes glowed with serenity, not sadness. He kissed her forehead gently before leaving. The next morning, on December 5, 1969, Princess Alice passed away in her sleep, peacefully, quietly, exactly the way she had lived her truest years. Buckingham Palace was filled with heavy silence when the news spread. Philip stood still for a long time, staring at the floor, his grief too heavy for words. Elizabeth placed her hand on his shoulder. Knowing this loss cut deeper than the world would ever see, publicly, he stood with dignity. Privately, he wept. Alice left behind almost nothing in material possessions, no jewels, no wealth, no grand estates. Her wish was simple. She wanted to be buried in Jerusalem, near her aunt and within the land she believed held sacred history. It took decades to fulfill, but ultimately her wish was granted. Her coffin was moved to the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, where nuns, clergy, and countless people she helped during the war came to pay respects. Jews, Christians, the poor, the broken, the forgotten. They honored her not as a princess, but as a woman whose compassion had saved lives and softened suffering. Years later, Yad Vashem recognized her as righteous among the nations for hiding the Cohen family during Nazi occupation. A name joined the ranks of those who chose humanity over fear, courage over silence, love over safety. Philip visited Jerusalem in 1994 to honor his mother. Standing by her grave, he bowed his head. Not as a prince, not as a consort, not as a public figure, but as a son. He whispered words only he and God could understand. Throughout his life, he rarely spoke of his childhood pain, his mother's illness, or the separation that marked his early years. But everyone knew he carried her memory with quiet devotion. He had inherited her resilience, her discipline, her strength, her unwavering sense of duty. But most of all, he inherited her heart. Princess Alice's life was not the tale of a royal who lived in luxury. It was the story of a woman who walked through fire, lost everything more than once, endured exile, mental suffering, war, poverty, and loneliness, and still emerged kind. Her legacy was not written in crowns or palaces. It was written in the lives she saved, the son she raised, and the grace she carried until her final breath. A rebel, a survivor, a saint in silence. And long after her passing, long after her story was swallowed by history books, one truth remains unshaken. She lived a life worthy not of royalty, but of reverence.